revised even further the proposed levy based on council direction to make some reductions in the levy to get closer or to that tax capacity rate. As we illustrated at the last work session, the tax capacity rate was just shy of 50%, 49.994 for 2024. I put together kind of a worksheet here. It's also included in your packet that shows those adjustments, but also kind of shows how that impacts the proposed 2025 levy. And that, of course, is based on tax capacity figures that we have available to us from Crowley County at this point. And keep in mind that those are preliminary and subject to change until the final ones are set, which typically isn't even done until February or March of next year. But looking at the proposed 25 preliminary levy, of originally of almost $9.5 million, had resulted in about $601,000 increase, or about 6.8%, which would have equated to about a 50.5% tax capacity rate. The adjustments that were proposed and shown in red in the general fund, or general government budget document, included the list that's shown on the screen there. Some of those adjustments were made for some additional revenues that we determined were available to the city, primarily through our funding partner at Sourcewell, who has a number of programs that are available to us. So we went back and kind of looked at some of those adjustments from that $9.5 million preliminary levy, and those included applying the public safety reimbursement, and that's for part of the police department's record management system with Crowley County. As they're working through that process of the new record management system, there is a grant that's available to the city. The police chief has applied for and was awarded that would be contingent upon moving forward with the county's RMS project, and that's a $20,000 reimbursement that we're able to reduce some of those costs associated with that record management system for which the city is a subscriber to with Crowley County. In addition to that, there's a public safety match grant at Sourcewell that the police department has applied for and was successfully awarded that would apply to next year's equipment costs that were included in this year's budget, and that was some of the various equipment as well as the body cam subscription costs, reducing the net levy by $50,000. On the city side, or non-public safety side, we could also utilize the match grant program through Sourcewell, so we would utilize that for some various city equipment costs in amount of $50,000. In addition to that, kind of, as I mentioned at the last meeting, we're still kind of working through some of the nuances of some of these changes that are occurring with software and subscription-based activities, the SaaS for short, and how to actually capture some of those things. So if you recall, in 2023, Minnesota had done some one-time public safety grant funding that we were able to utilize towards our body and squad camera costs, in addition to various squad equipment. So kind of utilizing some of those funds, we had initially thought we were going to utilize that entirely for the body and squad camera costs. As we worked through that contract that was approved earlier this year, there really wasn't an advantage to the city to pay for that all up front. They weren't going to give us a discount, so to speak, to pay for it all up front. So we will be paying those subscription costs for the next 5 years. So kind of re-examining how we're going to do that, putting that back in the department's budget for those costs. But there is some residual capital equipment fund amounts that we left over to utilize towards that $28,900. Balance of that $380,000 that we'll use for squad car costs over the next number of years. That's helped reduce the need to have a significant increase in that cost that we set aside each year for various equipment purchases along those lines. So there's about $28,000 that's identified that would impact the levy in that regard. Since then, we've gotten an update from the city of Brainerd on the actual cost of the prosecution for next year. So that actually is a little bit more than what we had anticipated in the preliminary budget you saw last week. so that does increase it by $6,000. The other costs that we fully accounted for that weren't included in there were some of those body and squad camera costs. The body cameras also include TASER subscription costs, so that net cost would be $58,700. That's offset, as I mentioned earlier, by some of those other grant things from Sourcewell, at least for 2025 they are. And then some reductions that were made in parks, minor land improvements, including foregoing the Whipple Beach dumpster closure at this point, just waiting a little bit longer until we go through that master plan part of it, and then kind of echoing that same thought with the LED parking lot upgrades at the beach as well for $6,900. So those total adjustments equal $104,300, which then reduces anticipation. The levy to $9,393,800, which is 49.999%. That's a little under $500,000 increase in the levy from 2024, or about 5.6% overall, down from the 6.8 that was presented at the last meeting 2 weeks ago. So then you can kind of see a little bit further, based on the impact of that, that's assuming no change basically then in the levy rate. However, we do know that there are some adjustments occurring because of valuation changes. And again, these are just average increases. Each houses and properties can be different. But looking at the Crow Wing County abstracts from the final 2023 one and comparing that to the 2024 spring one with the new construction added, and kind of extrapolating out that new construction, we can kind of determine that that average residential increase is about 5.59%, whereas the commercial industrial is about 4.38%. So somewhat closer than what some of we've seen in the past. We did see obviously in the previous few years where there was a significant shift occurring because of significant increases that were occurring on the residential side, and very little to no increase, and in some cases actually a reduction that was occurring on the commercial industrial side. So if you did apply kind of that, I did 3 examples there of various residential homes. The first one is $95,000, and that's purely just based on the new market value homestead credit program. That was previously the $76,000 limit, and we received a full $304, excuse me, credit from the state. In the last legislative session, the state did make some of those changes that do go into effect for payable 2025 property taxes that now increase that maximum credit to the $95,000 home, and then from that it starts to phase out until you reach that new threshold, which is now a $520,000 limit. So a little bit of an adjustment that occurred there, probably not quite to where we saw, at least not in Crow Wing County, City of Baxter specifically, where valuations went up pretty significantly more than what they adjusted, but it does help a little bit in that regard. So if you kind of looked at the increase from a $95,000 home, if it increased a little over 5% to $100,000, excuse me, their city taxes would go up by about $29 based on that valuation change, not changing the rate, because the rate right now, based on those adjustments, is about the same. And then the $245,000 example is just based on the median home value according to the census for the city of Baxter. That increased by that little over 5%, we valued at about $260,000. So that valuation would increase the city's taxes by about $75, 6.8% overall. That higher limit where it's a market value homestead credit adjustment more saw their taxes go up, or would see their taxes go up about $146, about 5.6%. Then you look at a smaller commercial industrial valuation at $500,000. If they saw that lower 4% increase in their valuation to $522,000, that tax change for the city portion would be about $218. So we wanted to provide just a little bit of a summary kind of the adjustments that were here, kind of gain some additional comments from the council as we go from here. If you're comfortable comfortable with setting the levy at this amount or some other amount tonight, you certainly can do that on your other business. Otherwise, as you recall, we do have to adopt a preliminary levy by the end of September, so that the county can put those figures together for the notices that go out to taxpayers for the proposed taxes next year, later on in November.
Council comments?
Sure. I think it's great the police department stepped up and found some grants. That's super. I'm wondering if there's more we can do. I would certainly like to cut that even more if we could. I mean, we kind of left last time we talked about this thinking that we could go through and find what we were looking for out of the whole budget instead of just, one department. So, I think if we found this much in one department, maybe there's some efficiency that we can find somewhere else.
Especially since there's still time.
I'll generally try to stay out of specifics with the exception of this one comment. I was just looking at, and I haven't gone and looked out in the field to see what things look like, but the reduced park structure repairs, the LED upgrades, stuck out to me as something that could easily be flopped with the dugout repairs, move the dugout repairs, upgrade the lights, because the lower cost of having the lights upgraded should actually at least save pennies a month or whatever it is that having LED lights rather than the old lights would be. But I don't know anything about the dugouts, and aside from that, I'm not gonna dig into details on, I would just defer to staff on what's important and what's not.
Chief, would the LED lights at Whipple have any impact on the vandalism in these schools? Is it gonna be that much brighter, or they're gonna do what they're gonna do it?
It's hard to say.
Yeah, in the context of not moving forward with LEDs, is we're gonna embark on a master plan that's gonna identify the actual physical building, the park or improvements to the park. As you know, we have additional 80 acres. There's thoughts of relocating the road so that there's more park on the park side than there is on things of that nature that are going to be vetted through a public process, and then the physical layout of the park itself may alter or change. The parking lot may shift or change or be expanded. Where additional lighting may come out of that in that context. So instead of doing it in pieces, was if we were to put together a comprehensive plan in place that spells out those capital improvements, we would do them collectively as one instead of doing it 2 or 3 times. And then have possibly 2 or 3 different light structures because they weren't all available at the time that they were ordered, so. But we can look at it. I do take into consideration that the supervisors and the department heads are trying to prioritize the maintenance of our facilities, may that be a fence or a dugout or anything of that nature. And so when the budget comes in, I'm expecting that to be already be vetted, but we can definitely ask the question. Or get confirmation, I should say.
Chief, I'm trying to find it on this current, Jeremy, you might have to, can you flip to the police portion? I'm trying to find it on my laptop. Can you speak to the cubicles, Chief? I think it's at about $40,000.
Yeah, 40 plus. That's just making do with what we've got down there. We currently don't have enough spaces to park the employees that we have, so we need to do that upgrade. It's all the the cube type walls would create 2, 4, 6, 8 workstations, and then on the far end, kind of 2 office areas. Right now we have 2 sergeants and the investigator sharing a small office space, and we need to squeeze a 4th one in there. So we'd be taking 1 out of that room, and that's what the 2 office areas would be for.
So you reconfiguring the furniture you have?
No.
Where is it all new or partially new or?
Well, I guess it would be new, yeah. That's what the quote was for. We've got 25-year-old used furniture that was provided to us when we moved into that update. And then we did get a partition wall used 6 years ago. So we haven't seen much new down there in 25 years. So we could probably shop used stuff, but this is just getting us by.
Depending on what happens with the possible new facility, if that can all be brought with.
I would say absolutely not, but
Absolutely, the new stuff.
I've been using used stuff for 30 years. I know I'm quitting, but
No, but if we purchase it new now.
yeah, it won't be new 2 years from now when you move into a new building. That's all I'm saying is,
Okay,
we've been using used stuff for 30 years.
I understand.
I think we've done our share. So,
But in the context, Connie, I think we would look at repurposing it somewhere within a facility, not necessarily PE, but would be looking at a space where we have cubicles. And a lot of our furniture within City Hall is at that 15, 20-year window that needs to be replaced. And we were able to accommodate some of that with some new equipment that would be repurposed.
15, 20 years ago when they got that, that's what we got. That old stuff. We haven't seen new furniture since pre-2000. So,
And that's kind of where I was going towards, the timing of it. If it can be repurposed, then that's good to hear. Otherwise, my question would be you know, not that you don't need new furniture, that's not what I'm saying, but is it the right time to invest $40,000 into this building?
I totally agree, but we've been waiting and waiting, and we can't wait any longer. We don't have enough chairs, you know, and this is short of building walls. We don't want to do that down there. That doesn't make sense.
No.
So, I know it's hard, but
Well, furniture systems become reasonable when you move them. So, like you say, you can't afford to build walls, so you build cubicles. And cubicles are expensive, no matter whether you buy them used or new. But they don't become affordable, if that's the right word, until you move them at least once. And it sounds like you're in furniture now that's been moved at least twice.
at least
Yeah, that being 15 years ago.
25.
25 years ago. Yeah, there's no doubt you probably need it.
And that's the stuff we put together out of the box 28 years ago. So I
Sure.
got the history behind it.
I just like the value would be not getting 2 years out of Ray.
I
You know,
get
for
it.
3 year, that's the question.
It would
It
have-
wasn't whether or not to need it.
It would have to
that's, and if the proffer or the thought is that it could be reused, so that, like, you're right, you can move it and get 5, 6 more, you know, however many years out of it, then I think, then the 40,000 becomes 20,000.
Another 25.
25. Second question is, I thought I said something, maybe not, about the, and it wasn't in this week's work session packet, it was in the previous one from 2 weeks ago, the changes from department requested budgets. I don't think it's in this week's, but it was in last week's. Is that accurate, Jeremy?
Yeah, I don't think the way I agreed put it in here was in the one you went
It
through.
was the September 3rd one,
Right.
page 28 of the equation, but not that you need to look at it right now, but, and it just, I saw a couple requests for, I think, 2 full-time employees. One was split with Public Works, and Trevor might have to help me out. One was 60-40, I think, or 70-30 between streets and storm, and then there was a admin person, I think that was split 50-50 between public administration and streets and lights. Is that accurate, Mr. Trevor?
It was parks and trails and public works admin.
Okay, I didn't see it under parks maintenance. Okay, so I asked this because I think it was last year, I tried to put Brad, city manager, on the spot, because I think there was a request for 3 or 4 bodies and kind of prioritizing them. And I recall Trevor pulling back his request for FTE so that we could fund, I think, the police department and code enforcement officer, if I recall. Is that sort of accurate? So I'm just wondering where we're at as far as fulfilling the request, because I see it got pulled off without discussion on the department request. And it did come up in discussion 2 weeks ago, so I'm wondering if that's something, and it kind of goes into my second question. Well, so is that off the table? And then it would go to my second question is, when we look at, I think it's, and maybe I'm incorrect, when we look at the public works and the police department, you can kind of get a sense through the requirements for the overtime pay expenses, how your staffing looks. A lot of overtime, probably need to do full-time. How do we do that with salary employees? Are we doing that to know if there's, you know, a need for another person? I assume there's a need because there's a request for it, but it didn't ever make it to the council for discussion at the work session.
Sure, I'll be more than happy to take a stab at answering it for you. In regards to the requested staff within the public works realm, and I'll just call it as a realm because there's multiple divisions. One was for a maintenance 1 position, which you referenced as the 70-30, 70 street, 30 storm, or vice versa. That's part of the overall division restructure that we implemented several years ago. It was indicating that at full reorganization that we would have 3 maintenance 1 individuals. In conversation with the supervisor and the department head through the budget process last year and this year, we indicated that timing for that 3rd one wasn't necessarily the right moment for the 3rd maintenance position. In fact, that was something that Brian said in the context of the last budget meeting that we had is that he wants to create different efficiencies to try and determine if when that 3rd position was warranted. Now he has since moved on to a new position in another community. We would task the new supervisor when we hire them to be able to monitor it and make that determination when the 3rd maintenance position will be warranted. As it relates to the other FTE, it was essentially 1.5, and that was basically reorganizing, or one, I should say, it's taking the administrative assistant that is shared between parks and streets utilities divisions, having that individual slide over full-time into the streets and utilities, and that a additional administrative assistant would be created that would be shared between Parks and Public Works Administration. I had removed it from the budget. For those of you that have gone through budgets previously, when a position is being requested, I asked for a clarification or warrant of the need. You know, with the reorganization of streets and utilities and adding the 3 maintenance positions, things of that nature, we didn't quantify. We did hours work, things of that nature. What was generally supportive of exploring and looking at FTEs, but when there's nothing that is submitted that that gives me the ability to do a complete assessment, I'm not comfortable with presenting that to the council. So.
Code enforcement position, was that in there somewhere? We talked about
That was in this year's budget. In that context, we are working with the attorney on getting our city code strengthened. There is a job description that's been drafted that's being, it will eventually be scored, so when we're adopting the ordinance revisions, that we will then be advertising for that vacancy.
Is that, so that's in addition to what you were just?
No, that was already in last year, in this year's budget, and it's already accounted for in next year's budget.
I have a comment to that. Okay. So in the community development fund, I'm not comfortable with proposing a budget that has no revenues listed for license, permits, charges for services in that fund. Is that, in notes in here, we're gonna look at that. But, I mean, if you look at last year's budget now, maybe you can tell me, we had 2024 budget here of revenues of 675,000. Did we actually take that much in as part of the community development fund?
Not yet, that's for this year, because that's the current year. The 23 actual would probably be the better equation to look at, or the better accurate look at. That's through the whole year. 24 budget's just what was been budgeted for this year, so.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
even if you took that, that's $500,000.
Right.
It's halfway there to wiping out the whole increase over last year's budget. And then, if we look.
Well, keep in mind that 500,000 is funding the 775,000 of expenditures that are proposed in this department. So
Okay,
there is a.
but if you look at 2025 expenditures, you're expensing out $500,000 with no income.
We're showing the proposed expenditures at 775,000. The revenues would offset the total. Make sure you're adding both the building inspections and the planning part of it on the first page. I don't know what was the planning amount.
Okay,
Yep, the 467.
so
plus
total fund expenditures is $775,000.
Right.
So we're expensing that.
That would be the estimated expenditures area for the year. Yep.
So it's, in the budget, it's a negative $775,000.
Right, but we're not showing any revenues at this point. So
You're not showing any revenues, so if
Right.
we showed revenues, you'd lower the budget.
not in the general fund. It's not that part of it's not tied back to the general fund. Right now, it's not showing anything other than the transfer in there.
Okay, well,
Yes.
how come in 23, you have $560,000 in total fund expenditures. You have revenues,
Right.
so you only have a total over-under expenditure of minus 64,000.
Right.
So you're telling me that the revenues coming into community development don't affect this bottom line of 775,000?
No, they will, but there's no, the only transfer that's coming from the general fund is what was shown up earlier on there, where we're funding part of the community development fund from the general fund.
I understand that, we always have.
Right.
We always have subsidized it.
Yep.
But the problem is anywhere else in the budget, in this budget today, are you showing any revenue coming into community development?
No,
But there will be.
there will be, yes. That will reduce that 775,000. Yes.
And if we use 2023 numbers, not 2024, you're looking at potentially $500,000.
Right. Right. So there'd be still, there'd still be a deficit that would be occurring just because of the timing of when their building permits come in versus when the services occur.
There'd be a $275,000 deficit.
Right. That would.
But it would lower the whole budget by $500,000.
I know what you're saying, Mark, but it's not tied back to what the levy is, other than what we are transferring out of it. So it lowers the overall budget, but it doesn't affect the levy beyond the amount of money that we are showing as a transfer from the general fund.
And how much are you showing as a
Which
transfer?
we are showing $325,000.
Well, okay, $325,000. That's 3 times what you came to us with tonight.
No, that number
That's
was.
3 times what you showed the police department saving us on the very first slide.
No, the 325 was what was presented at the last meeting as well.
No, that's not what I'm looking at. So the revenues are gonna offset the 325.
The 325 is gonna cover part of the $700-some thousand.
Agreed?
That plus revenues that are not currently in there would cover the total. So conservatively, if you estimated that revenues equaled what they did in 2023, 500,000, that 500,000 included $100,000 transferred here. So really it was $400,000 of other revenues that had occurred in the community development fund. The 400,000 plus the 325 transfer would be very close to the 775. The reason we haven't done the revenue projections yet is because we're kind of looking at the overall fee structure in community development.
So you're telling us that $400,000 to $500,000 worth of fees coming into community development are not gonna change the levy?
Right.
But you haven't accounted for that coming into the budget.
Into the specific department budget for community development, right?
How does that magic work?
Trying to think of a
I'm
different way to
not
explain
following
this.
that at all.
Yeah, I know, I'm trying to think of a different way of explaining this. Because we look at the general fund as kind of where all the property tax levy comes in, and then a portion of that, $1 million of it goes out to other special revenue and capital project funds.
Yes.
For which we've identified 325,000 of that. So if you looked at the 325,000 as already being accounted for in that overall levy, what was shown earlier, that in combination with the various community development fund revenues, the building permits, planning and zoning fees, and so forth, that amount, those two amounts are what's funding that 775,000. That's why it's showing as a deficit of 775 right now. But when you look at the 23 actual, it was very close to being breaking even.
Okay. But you're not accounting for any fees coming in community development.
Currently, no.
Okay. So if you're not accounting for it right now, the deficit is going to the levy. It's going to our budget. No matter what the levy is, it's going
We're
to our-
anticipating that the 325 is needed regardless. I don't know that we're gonna see actual revenues be significantly higher than that approximately $400,000 net increase in the other revenues that are shown there. Because keep in mind that $500,000 from 23 actual includes $100,000 that was transferred from the general fund in 23. We bumped that up in 24's budget and in 25's budget to account for the fact that we're adding a code enforcement position in the community development fund to pay for those costs. So the combination of, if you look at the net fees, if they be similar in 25 as what they were in 23 actual, the net amount is about $400,000. If we plugged in $400,000 of revenues right now, assuming same activity, same fee schedule, everything else, plus the $300 and some thousand dollars transfer in, that would give us about $700,000.
Okay, so scroll down
Yep.
until you get to the total that you showed me a minute ago. Fund expenditures. On down. Down further. That's not what I'm looking for.
No, I know, it's just a little slow.
We're looking for just under the building inspection expenditures. Okay. So yes, you're gonna cover that total expenditure of $775,000 with those two numbers.
Right.
I understand that.
Yep. Okay.
But right now, in this budget, you're telling us there's a $775,000 deficit.
It's not tying back anywhere else in the budget. I think that that's what you're asking, if it's impacting the levy, anything beyond. It's not tying back anywhere else in the budget beyond the $325,000 that we're transferring from the general fund.
That's not part of your overall budget. Aren't all of these costs totaled up your overall budget?
Not in the preliminary, we don't go through and come up with one final number. We do that for the final budget. We take the total revenues and expenditures and net any transfers against those to come up with a number.
Then how is the number we're talking about accurate? I'm sorry.
I know we're not on the same page, obviously.
No,
I'm trying to figure out a better way to explain this. When we put together the total levy, it's comprised of what's needed in the various general fund departments, but then also what's being transferred out on that last page of the general fund to fund some of the special revenue and capital project funds. We've identified, at least at this point, that it's, we put in as a placeholder the $325,000, which that $325,000 transfer, along with revenues from community development, would hopefully come close to where that expenditure amount is proposed for 2025 in community development. Keeping in mind that there's fluctuations that occur timing just based on when permits come in versus when the services are done.
Okay, let me back up to another department, back to parks.
Okay.
We're not showing any revenue in parks.
The revenues in parks in the general fund are shown in the various, it's all combined in the general fund at the beginning. It's not its own separate. Parks does not have its own separate fund. So it's part of the
Are you
general
taking
fund.
in account,
So
right now, are you taking into account any park dedication fees?
now that's a different fund. Capital Parks Fund is a different fund. We did not budget for any capital park dedication fees. We typically don't unless we know that there's a significant project cost.
So you're gonna tell me that negative number doesn't come out of our levy either?
No, those costs will be coming out of that park dedication fund. It would have to be within the confines of the existing fund balance that's in there from those revenues that have been accumulated in that fund. So specifically in the general fund, there's various revenue sources that make up the general fund. Some of those are just generic or general in nature, such as the property tax levy, franchise fees. We have a little bit of special assessments. That one is related to specifically to the public and trail, or nature learning trail. So that one you could say is kind of a parks related one because it's paying for that maintenance of those trails up on the nature learning center. And then there's various licenses and permits that aren't allocated, all out specifically, so you've got your various, alcohol and other permit licenses that result in intergovernmental revenues, and that's a combination of not only the LGA that we now receive, but also there's some police state aid that's included in that as well. Charges for services includes various charges for services across the entire general fund. So you have some, you might have things like your special assessment searches, you have our SRO contract with the school district as a charge for service. Those things aren't specifically allocated to a specific budget or department because they're within the general fund. Community development fund is made up of two departments, one being planning and zoning and the other one being building inspections.
So if we got zero revenues coming into the community development, where do you make up the difference?
We would have more than likely a deficit in a fund that we would have to make up in the future. So from year to year, like I said, it fluctuates. Sometimes we use a little bit of the fund balance, sometimes we build on the fund balance. It just depends on the activity that occurs in that fund. I'll just use as an example, at the end of 2003, we had some building permit revenues, I think that were related to some of the apartments that came in, but then the apartments weren't done until 2024. So, some of those permits might come in one year, but then all the activities may not occur until they might trail into the next year.
Jeremy, I think it would be fair to say the community development fund was established as a common practice across many municipalities. As the revenue coming in for development-related improvements, the goal or objective of the community development fund is to minimize the impact that the department has on the general levy itself. There's years where you had numerous, or not numerous, but excess revenue over expenditures, and the intent is that money be put aside so that when years you have negative numbers that you're kind of balancing out, similar to the water fund and street fund, things of that nature, so that you're getting rid of the ebbs and flows that the impact onto the budget. Now, with the uncertainty of the development, we've seen it as a trend is that that fund isn't covering all expenditures. I think we can go back several years to show that it hasn't, so there is an impact onto the general levy as illustrated there. That as we look at fee structures and things of that nature is to try and reduce that. There hasn't been a fee adjustment in regards to building permits, zoning applications that we're going through right now with the intention to try and reduce that exposure, but not at the 320,000. We're just not, I think the days are gone in which it's going to be self-sufficient.
So I remember when we created these funds, and part of the reason we put community development together with planning, or with building inspection, because building inspection, we were growing at such a rate, and the mandated building inspection fees that we were collecting were more than it took to run the building inspection department.
Well, that's always, I think, been the case, Mark, because you look at the building inspector positions, they've always been in the community development fund since we've established the community development fund. Planning and zoning has to a certain degree too, you know, there's certain supervisory duties that the community development director has over building inspections as well. And I guess my recollection more is the philosophy was that we wanted development to pay for its own way as much as possible. And through the building inspection and the planning and zoning fees, the idea was that those costs would be particularly paid by those fees that are charged, with the idea that it's a little harder, I think, sometimes to get the planning and zoning fees to fully cover their costs. But the theory is that when the building incurred and the inspection fees were paid as part of that, it was covering part of those planning and zoning related costs, because you needed to do the planning and zoning to do the actual development, to actually do the construction later on that would occur.
No, I agree with that.
Are we at the day where in 2004, 2005, we were building 100 homes a year, where we probably were generating significant more revenues in there? No, I mean, those days aren't here. There's always gonna be a certain amount of planning and zoning that's gonna occur regardless of whether we probably have growth or development occurring anyway, for the betterment of the community. So I guess that's just a council question of if that's your philosophy, that there would be some subsidy to some degree from the general fund and the property tax levy to pay for some of those more generic community-wide, citywide benefits that are occurring that maybe aren't specifically related to a development or application that comes in.
No, I understand completely, but I'm still at a loss of why we're not including the revenue, because if we didn't get any revenue, we'd be subsidizing more of it out of our general fund, which would then
Yeah.
have to come out of the levy.
Right. Yeah, no, it's purely just because we haven't had an opportunity to go through that review right now. We're doing that this fall to look at what those fees, recommendations should be as part of the next year's fee schedule.
And it's fair to say, based upon that review and that calculation, we're estimating that worst case scenario is 325. That based upon fee structure amendments and changes that may change in the context that it reduces that 325. We just haven't completed that process yet.
Right, yeah, I think that's fair to say, but I don't know that it's a huge change in that 325 figure.
No.
Just based on historical, what we've seen permit revenues, but. And it's a little trickier to forecast permit revenues because, we don't know exactly what's gonna change in the economy or what's gonna change with, building activity as well.
No, we've always tried to be very conservative with it.
Right.
We've always planned something.
Yep. No, I could have certainly put numbers in there, but I don't know that they would have, I just didn't feel like they would be very helpful at this point until we've gone through that analysis. Do we know that there's at least the 325 figure based on what's shown in the proposed budget being transferred? Yes, so I mean, there's at least the 325 of revenues being proposed, which would reduce that expenditure.
So I think what I'm getting at is that all of these special funds, it doesn't matter if we cut anything in them or not. It's not gonna, those funds aren't gonna change the levy, right?
I think that's fair to say because they typically have their own funding source, albeit some levy support. Yep.
Because you're able to have negative balances in there and borrow from them.
You're able to utilize the existing fund balance within there. And that's, that's part of the reason why they are separate funds too, because we can track them that way too. Where, if you just had your building inspection revenue in the general fund, it would just be in there for that year and it wouldn't show any balance available for the following year to utilize. So you look at the various special revenue funds, our cemetery fund is funded somewhat through a property tax levy as well from a transfer to pay for some of the maintenance. But then it also is paid for by 50% of the plot and columbarium sales, with the other half of that going in the perpetual care fund that isn't spent, where only the interest is available to fund the operations. Our capital parks fund is primarily funded through the fees as well. Sales tax is another special revenue fund, but that's entirely sales tax. It's just a collection point for the sales taxes that is utilized, actually on a transfer out basis to various capital project funds, depending on the capital project or the utility project that's being done. The various capital equipment fund or capital project fund, we have capital equipment fund where we're funding through transfers from departments to pay for future equipment replacements. Could you adjust those? Certainly you could adjust those a little bit, but then that impacts the ability to do those replacements of those equipment purchases, which some may be this year, some may be in future years, as outlined in the budget. Similarly with the capital streets and street maintenance funds, those are funded through some municipal state aid funding from the state, as well as franchise fees.
No, I agree with that. Yeah, have a savings account to buy those big ticket items. So have we contracted yet for professional services for future city facilities?
Not.
What's that?
I refer to Brad, but no.
No, we have not. As part of the agenda tonight is reviewing the proposed work plans for City Hall, and for the other priority is identified as what the estimated costs are. In the 2025 budget, there is $200,000 to be put towards professional services, regardless if it's a remodel expansion here or a new facility in that context, with the idea that we would levy the same in 2026 or roll it into the total project cost that we would put towards debt service. Whatever whatever the amount for debt service.
We've got three other things on the agenda. One of those, Mark, is what you're asking about too. So I'm trying to cut this off, but if we're not done, if we're not ready, we have some options on some more meetings, and we can certainly do that. We've got until December 2nd to actually change the.
We do have to adopt the preliminary levy.
I understand that, I wasn't quite done, but so we still have to do the submit it to the county by the 30th of September, and so we have to have some. And I know how it is. It's always nice to have as close to the right number before those cards get printed. Yeah, I understand that, but we do have some days that Jeremy threw out that we could still have some more meetings and discuss this further if that's what you'd like to do. So help me.
I'm gonna just make a comment. It just so happens one of our audience members might remember this time that we spent like an hour going around and around about the enclosure around the dumpster, because we got into details on budget. And I'm starting more and more to think of this more as the budget. We have till December 2nd to let staff do what they do and figure out what within the number makes the most sense. The number we're concerned about is this 5.6% increase over 2024. And I think it would be fair for us as a council at a more vision and strategy level to decide what that number should be. And we can do that tonight rather than find line items to discuss and just say the budget increase will be 5.4%, 5.25%, whatever that number is. And then staff can figure it out. And that, I prefer going that route personally, just because, as I mentioned with the LED lights, I don't want to be involved in that. It just stood out. I shouldn't have even brought it up. I should have started with this. That's where I'm gonna end it, is I should have never brought it up. And I'd rather say, I'd like to see a 5.4% final levy, preliminary levy that we set, and let staff decide what within that is the budget.
I agree with that. I missed my first budget meeting, I think, ever, but I read all the fine reporting that was done, and then all the minutes of the meetings, and spent time with staff today. And I really thought you guys did a great job getting it to where it was, working with staff. And I'm really kind of okay where it is too. One thing that I always worry about is, and Jeremy had bold letters, that if you made some mistakes and you want to increase it, you can't. And so you can always decrease it, and that's fine. It's not end of life there either. But if we can be fairly sure about what we're gonna do, I'm fine with moving ahead with it too.
At the 5.6.
Mayor, if I could suggest, letting that simmer in the context, we do have it as other business to talk about the levy rate and things of that nature. We do have several items on the work session, that we should attend to, but in that context, when we get to the regular session, I think that would be the time to determine, if you 5.6 or a dollar amount or, whatever that is that we can move forward and adjust the resolution, that Jeremy can record with, file with the county.
Okay. Move to number 2. Thanks, Jeremy. Sorry, it's slowly at the top of the.
Number 2 is the preliminary aquifer evaluation. SEH, Al, are you here? Downstairs, yeah.
Well, I was gonna apologize for being late, but you came so I was like, I came home
Not a
to
chance.
Old Town, I've got a meeting all day there for today, so I was like, so we're through cities, it's just all day. But anyway, but I made it, so, and we did find a slight correction we need to make in the report that we are, based on something that Trevor pointed out earlier this afternoon while I was driving, and I couldn't do anything about it, so, but anyway, I think there's a presentation that,
Kevin, do you have that presentation on your laptop?
I've got it here, I can pull it up to it. Okay. Is it in the work session? Yeah, it's just below your item
okay,
in the packet.
I didn't grab anything. I was driving all afternoon, so.
Starts on page 36 of the work session packet.
There we go.
This is a PDF, not a PowerPoint, so you're gonna have to scroll.
Okay.
There's a page up and down right here that works too. That works for you.
Lord. So, anyway, kind of works, but I'm not sure it's how otherwise.
It's one of the four jobs.
So anyway, we've been working on evaluating your aquifer, your current well field, as well as looking toward the future. And I didn't really give a full presentation to the council for the first part of it, where we were looking just at the existing well field. So what I did is I kind of combined it into kind of a single presentation there, okay? And let's see if I can,
If you use the scroll button, you can center it.
oh, there we go, bring us up and anyway, so the first thing that we did was an existing well field evaluation. We have been seeing a decrease in well-specific capacity, and we came to the conclusion in that report. Is this the first page? I don't really think it's here. Yeah, I think we were kind of,
Now you're going down.
I'm going down.
You're still going down.
There's you. Hi there.
I'll just, because I've got my sheet to scroll down the screen.
Yeah.
I'll just switch this out.
I know. You know, different computer, I don't know how to do this.
No, you're perfectly fine.
Got it.
So then all you gotta do is just.
Oh, that will be much better. There, now I can see it. Okay, I apologize. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So we were having a problem with them, because we wanted to evaluate the aquifer and what was going on in that aquifer. And some of the things that we feel, after we evaluated this, and this was in a May 2024 report we did, was first of all, your aquifer is an unconfined aquifer, meaning that the upper surface of the water is in contact with the atmosphere, okay, just because it's just the way it is, that we don't have any clay barriers or anything there. And as a result, the aquifer has a high atmospheric carbon dioxide, meaning when it rains, it picks up carbon dioxide in the air, and it soaks into the ground, and it increases the carbon dioxide in your aquifer. And when it does that, it forms carbonic acid, which is an acid, which means it increases the pH. And what it does is it eventually, that makes acid starts dissolving, that calcium carbonate goes in there, a calcite mineral that's naturally in your soils. So then when you start pumping on the aquifer, okay, that pumping releases carbon dioxide. So it's just almost reverses the effect again, and the pH goes back up, and now the calcium carbonate wants to precipitate back out again, and we get clogging in the wells and the formations around the wells. So it's just, this is what you have in the city of Baxter. It just kind of makes up that. So what, you know, when we were in the drought conditions in 2023, we had a lot more pumping going on because of the need for the water, and the more we pumped, the more precipitates were being formed. So it's just a kind of a catch-22 there. This is just the situation that we're dealing with. So, so another thing that we looked at the time is we evaluated what we call the zone of influence or cone of depression around the wells when they pump. So obviously, when you're pumping, the water level decreases in the vicinity of the well, you know, on either side, as it's trying to recharge and fill up the water, those pores as we're emptying it from water and refilling it back in there. So, and the issue that we have when we have wells that are spaced relatively close together is we have an interference occurring because you have wells that are right next to each other that are pumping. And it kind of just makes the situation worse, okay? So we wanted to know in this aquifer, what would be a better distance to space these wells as an alternative. Continuing on with that zone of influence or cone of depression, you know, we did, you know, your staff did wonderful jobs of trying to manage it the best they can. They were rotating the wells, the length of pumping on a well, the rates of pumping, but the demand with the drought, and everything was there, it's all kind of coming together, okay? And so we want to see what we can do to maximize or at least optimize the well spacing. So we used something called the Tice well function equation, and using the information that was collected when the well field was first developed, or in the early years of the well field there. And as a result is we really felt we did not want to have wells closer than 1,000 feet. The best, you know, as long as, you know, we want to optimize conditions rather than to minimize that interference. What we suggested at that time is to do some exploration to see if we can use the word replace. It might be a supplement, kind of, you know, see what we find as we do this investigation. But any future ones, we want to do be at least 1,000 feet out. That's really what the recommendation is. And that's a project that's being done separately, and that should start here in a few weeks, okay? The other thing is we did like to try to utilize what the infrastructure that we have in place and the property we have here. We're trying to keep it on the property. And the existing well field, or the wells are on the west side. We're going to the east side of the site, and we're about 1,000 feet for those locations there. One of the things that we're going to do in the actual investigation is once we put some observation wells, I'm going to drop a transducer down there, and I'm going to see if we actually see influence from those other wells, and they're pumping. I'm really curious to see how that goes. So that's where we're kind of looking at how we can do some additional work just in the existing well field and, optimize the conditions there for water. Part of the well spacing and some of the concerns here is that as the city of Baxter continues to grow, you're going to have more demand for water. And so we have to just take that into account going forward. And so the question is do we just try to keep relying on the same well field, or do we look for something to supplement the existing well field? And we're recommending that we look at options for a new well field so that you can continue to grow and you're comfortable with that. And it also just kind of gives you more options in managing your water pumping that we do. So the second part of our evaluation that we did was what are some options to look for a new well field. There was a lot of work that was done previously in the early 2000s, a lot of test drilling, a lot of reports, mapping, some other evaluations that were done on pumping on the well field, and some water quality testing done in 2014. So we wanted to use all of that existing information. In addition, we have some new data sources, and one being since that early 2000s when a lot of that work was done, the Minnesota Geological Survey did complete their geologic atlas, as the Part A and the Part B. The Part A being geology, Part B being more hydrogeology. And also we have a lot more information from the well index that was maintained by the Department of Health. And so we can see what other drilling has been done in the area as well. So we pull that information together, and I know this is small, there's always because look at the report, but in general, you can see blue dots all over that. Each one of those is a well record in the health department's website. There's some other lighter colored ones. Those wells just have the locations haven't been finalized, but it's probably in that general area. But all this information, all this drilling's already been done in your city, whether you realized it or not, okay? Then, so we thought we would take this information and generate new geologic cross-sections, one going east-west and one going north-south. You will notice though, for all blue dots that we're seeing in the northern part of the city, that southern part there's very few, which can be a good thing. That just means we don't know what's there. So with the new well field evaluation, we updated our understanding of the hydrogeology. There are distinct glacial geologic units now that have been identified and named for the county, and so we can actually put a name to these features that have been defined through the years. We also identified specific aquifers, and essentially two. We have a superficial aquifer, which is essentially the water table. Groundwater flow is generally toward the Mississippi, and it's often influenced by lakes and creeks. You think just north of your plant, you have that Perch Lake there, and that would be tied there. But if you do go deeper into the aquifer, the MDS defined it as an outwash aquifer. Your existing wells, the depth that they're in is what we're calling an outwash aquifer. It is hydraulically connected to the superficial one, which is why we have the carbon dioxide problem, right? And then flow in there is also generally toward the Mississippi. So this is just part of one cross section that we looked at. This one is goes from west to east. And if you look at the pink label on the side there, to a little bit halfway to the right there, it says that's your existing well field. You can see how deep your wells generally go in that area. We do have some existing borings to the west there a little bit, but you can also see as you go further west, we have there's drilling that's been done there, but it's not gone very deep. Okay, the light blue is what we're calling the superficial aquifer, and the yellow is the outwash aquifer. So that's kind of showing that it looks like there's a potential that outwash aquifer continues further west. Okay. This is the geologic cross section that goes north to south with the north to the right. Okay. You can see where your existing wells are again, how deep we go in those locations. And but as you go to the north, you can see that light green, those light green units are actually clayey soils. You're not going to get water out of those. So we have some different conditions as we go north in the city in that regard there. And you can see that on the very far left there, there's quite an indent in the surface there. That's the Mississippi River. So you can kind of see at what depth that is. A few other things that we looked at in Foreigner City are potential contaminant sources. Obviously don't like to propose a well where there's already some groundwater contamination. And for the most part, we were pretty happy with what we saw across the city, that you're in pretty good shape. That we have one area there over in yellow that has some groundwater contamination. But for the most part, especially in the area around your existing well field, kind of on the south side there, there's not much out there, so there's a lot less chance for contamination there. So we just want to stay away from certain things if we have the opportunity to do that. And then we start identifying some potential well siting areas, okay? And another criteria that we looked at in this was what property is already owned by the city. Because obviously that's more accessible for exploration, but it would be more accessible for if you ended up putting in a well at that point. And so in this area, the cross-hatched areas, you can kind of see the spots of areas that we have across the city that are owned by the city, so they would be accessible for doing some sort of exploration. Now, talking with Trevor, he was very, very clear that we wanted to eliminate anything north of 210, just because of the dynamics of trying to get across 210. And that really was the area that was less useful anyway, because we had some of those clay soils up there. But we identified 4 areas. We're calling them A, B, C, and D. A being the light blue area, and that was kind of our first preference just because of its proximity to the plant. If we need to bring that water in, the closer we are, the more, obviously more cost effective to bring this water in. B for us was the red area, because it would be much easier to bring in water lines along some of the major roadways and things like that. And then we did C to the south, and D we still have a portion of green there that still has some city-owned property that we thought was worth looking at as well. So we did that with A, B, C, and D is the 2 different area or 4 different areas that we were looking at. And for each of these areas, and I don't need to necessarily go into a lot of detail, but we do a little bit of a description and why we picked some of those locations. And obviously, the accessibility and some of the geology and some of the things. And those for each of the area, the report does have more detailed descriptions. So when it all said and done, we made some recommendations, talking with city staff, and we're suggesting to keep your options open and to do, at some point, do some exploration of each of the 4 areas. You know, to do some drilling. We would suggest at least 2 borings because it tells us a little bit about consistency in the area. We also would suggest installing an observation well in one of those because we can measure water levels, we can collect water quality samples, there's a lot of things we can do with those observation wells. We would say we'd like to consider using sonic drilling methods, which is what we're going to be using here in a couple of weeks for the other exploration that we're doing. And the main reason is because it provides pretty much 100% recovery of the materials that are encountered, so you get a much better picture of what's down there. And I'll actually show you some pictures here in a second. And then ultimately, and then we conduct some water quality sampling. Eventually, based on what we find on those explorations, the city will be in a position then, I think, to select their most favorable one for development based on the conditions at the site, accessibility, and how it fits in your plans for expansions and so on like that. Then at that point, then we would actually recommend putting in a test well, doing the pump test, and just confirm before we commit to that site. We suggest the timeline to kind of coincide with the health of the existing well field. We know we've had some issues. We'll see what our 2 new drilling locations can give us, and with the hope of putting 2 new wells over there. But we need to just keep that in mind of what some of the issues have been here and try to extend the life of this area as much as possible. We wanted to coincide with your planning for water demand, if you have new developments coming in, or new, you know what I mean? Baxter is a very, very exciting city to be in nowadays. It's expanding very quickly. But we would suggest you can consider it within 3 to 5 years because it's very difficult to do this overnight. It's something that's going to take some time. With that, we did take a look at some cost estimates. We were kind of lucky because we just bid out and got drilling costs for the exploration that we're doing. So it was easy just to kind of extrapolate that to a future one. So we're using some 2024 fees versus what they might be in, let's say, 3 years, with an increase in for inflation there. And it's like the drilling costs, sonic methods are not cheap, okay, because they are a better method. But I think they tell you more and that you can make better decisions off of that data. And so we're looking to start thinking about budgeting for 2027, potentially as early as 2027. It could be an additional $250,000 to do that type of an evaluation at that point in time. And then, as I promised, this happens to be on another site that we're in sand and gravel here. Each one of these, the samples come out in sleeves, plastic sleeves, okay? And they did these in 5-foot runs, but they're put them side by side, so these are representative of 10 feet across for each one of those. And you can kind of see that for each of those 5 feet, you know exactly what's in that 5-foot sample. You know the gravel, you know some of those things that might contribute to yield and water quality, but also, where would be the best portion of that to screen to maximize our yields and if there are pumping capacities and things like that. So just that's for planning in the future there, and we'll see in a couple of weeks how things go with the drilling plan.
evaporates, that we have an additional resource to meet demand, so.
Yeah. And you just kind of feel like, boy, if you have two, you know that while one is, if you do need to do rehab or something going on in one, you have something else to always add that back to. But I think long-term is a good thing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you for your computer.
Move on to Fairfield Road Extension feasibility report.
All right, 2027 Fairview Road Utility and Roadway and Trail Improvements. This project area includes Fairview Road, pointer there, extension of Fairview Road up to the existing cul-de-sac, or not cul-de-sac, roundabout at Excelsior Road. Back in 2018, the roundabout went in. It was always planned to put this connection in, but at that time, only the roundabout leg was installed and not the rest of the roadway. So this is the connection and finish of that project. So there's some utility improvements with this project. There's a very small sanitary sewer extension on the south end, and that's to service this undeveloped parcel in this area here. Water main through the roadway, just provide looping for the project and for the city. A little bit of storm sewer on the south end. We'll need a pond and storm sewer on the south end. Drainage is split about in the middle, so the south will drain, or the south half of this property will drain to the south, and then the north half of the road will drain to the north. A little bit of storm sewer connected to the existing storm sewer on Excelsior Road. For the roadway improvements, I'm just extending a 40-foot wide urban roadway with concrete curb and gutter north with connection to the roundabout. 10-foot wide trail on the west side of the road, all the way down to Fairview Road, and that would just dump onto the roadway and connect with the bike trail. Also a trail extending to the east, connecting the trail along the west side of Highway 371. And then you'll notice some improvements on private sites in this area. We have some parking lot improvements we need to do on the First Baptist Church property, and that's just because of the loss of parking as a result of the extension of this roadway on the north end there. Also closing down that existing median opening at the Franzen Bank entrance, and to mitigate for that, be putting in another drive access to Fairview Road in this area here, and then that would provide them access back out on Fairview Road and Excelsior Road. Estimated project costs, when you add everything up, you can see the sewer, water, roadway, storm sewer, those site modifications, the First Baptist Church and Franzen Bank trail, and then the intersection control. As part of this project, there is a carryover assessment for the roundabout, and that's this $313,000 you're seeing at the bottom here. So in all, we're about $2.2 million for this project. As far as how these costs would be collected by the city, sanitary sewer would be 100% assessed to the east side of the roadway, and that would be about $200 per foot for that assessment. Water improvements, again, would be assessed to the east side of the roadway at about $550 per foot. And then storm sewer improvements be assessed to both sides of the roadway, and that would be about $76 a foot. And then the roadway improvements, a little more complicated here. Roadway would be assessed to both sides of the road. However, the First Baptist Church property, their assessment is capped at $109.02 a foot. And that's because of an agreement that was made back in 2018. There was an assessment agreement between the city and the property owner that their rate would be capped at the same rate that was assessed back in 2018 for Excelsior Road. And then the city would contribute a lump sum of $230,000, and then basically everything left over that would be assessed to the east side of the roadway. And that's about $762,000 that would be assessed to the east side of the road. Trail improvements, because they're a citywide improvement, would be city cost, that's about $300,000. And then the intersection control, like I said, back in 2018, there was an area that was assessed for the roundabout. I'll show that in a couple slides here, what area that includes, but basically it's the service area along Fairview Road from the Fairview Road Office Park to the east to the roundabout. And then with this project, because we're connecting the roundabout, that's what triggers this assessment, and that assessment's about 6 cents per square foot. Here's the assessment exhibit for Fairview Road. You can see the assessable footages on both sides of the roadway. And then this is the intersection control assessment exhibit. You can see we're starting just west of Flintwood Drive. This is the last properties to be assessed to the west. That's the Fairview Office Park. And then every property to the east of that will be assessed all the way to the roundabout. All the yellow properties on this drawing have not been assessed yet for the roundabout, and then all the properties in red were assessed back in 2018. And then cost summary, you can see about 76% of the costs are assessed, and about 24% are initial city costs in this project, for a total of about $2.2 million for total project cost. And project schedule, again, this isn't scheduled for next year, it's scheduled for 2027. So we've laid out a project schedule, but basically all we're looking for tonight is just a motion to accept the report, update the CIP, and then the city staff can use the report to talk to the area residents that are affected by the project, and then also work with MnDOT on the overpass project, present these costs. This might be a separate route they can use to kind of detour traffic around that project. So that's kind of the purpose of the study.
I just want to make sure that it's clear understanding that the update of this is purely in relationship to the 371. We've always indicated that this improvement would be subject to development warrant. In that context, we're utilizing this opportunity to inform MnDOT that there's some planning that can be done, that if they determine that as part of the scope of the 371 overpass, they've got the numbers and it can be incorporated. That's the reason why it's identified as 27. So I just want to make it clear is the acceptance of the report is not putting this in stone for 27. It's forecasting out that it's the potential that this could be part of an overall larger project with the 371 overpass, should MnDOT determine that that's necessary.
Thanks, Eric. We've still got a couple things left on that agenda. Brad, how are we going to cover that again?
Yeah, I'll just look to pull the work plan consent agenda, number 5, lodging tax discussion. That was to seek directive. We will just move that to the October 1st work session. It's not time sensitive, so number 5 will move forward to October 1st, and